Hi, welcome back to the Reboot Show. I'm your host, Amy Smith, and today I'm joined by Luke Stow and Sally A Illingworth, who are regular panelists. I have Charu Bhardwaj here, who is a change management specialist, and Edwin Goon, who is a technology consultant working with global clients around the world. So thanks so much for being here, guys.
Pleasure to be here.
Happy to be here.
That's great. I'm so excited about today's topic because we're talking about the impacts of COVID on the workplace and the dynamics that has thrown up. You know, we've been thrown into this whole new world and we've just had to deal with it. So I'd be really interested in, hearing your perspectives from the changes that we're seeing in the workplace and also the impact that that's had on technology and the role that that's played in this process as well. So Edwin, to kick things off with you, for you and your clients, like what has this been like for you in terms of that transition?
So luckily for myself, I've been on plenty of global projects, and the client I'm with right now is actually running a global implementation project. So that in itself has given us the ability to transition quite easily. As being in a global setting, I've always have to be remotely dial in to the UK or to LATAM or to parts of Asia. So it hasn't been, it's been quite an easy transition for us currently.
Yeah, that's great. So what's been easy for it? Is it just the fact that you've been set up to be remote working before, or has there been some real changes that you have made since COVID's come into place to do that?
Yeah, so a bit of both. So I previously did have quite a mobile setup to be able to just set up anywhere. So be it in a cafe or in an office or a shared office overall.
Yeah.
But I guess the biggest benefit right now is not having to travel, being able to save the ability to not have to transit 1.5 hours each way into the CBD.
Yeah.
So that in itself has added more time into my day to actually focus on actually getting the deliverables done.
Yeah, perfect. Are you getting more work done in that time, or are you watching Netflix?
A bit of both. It's given me the ability to be quite flexible, because with the long hours of having to dial in internationally, I can spend some time in the middle of the day to have a bit of relax and watch some Netflix if I need to.
Perfect. And Charu, I mean, this has been a huge change management exercise in itself. So what are you seeing from a people's perspective in terms of how people are really dealing with the change that's been thrown up for them?
Well, I think at the start, myself and a lot of other people that I'll talk to, especially the extroverts, we all suffered. It wasn't an easy change from people's side of things. But slowly what I've discovered is you have to change. So change is inevitable. You have to be ready for it rather than whinging and whining. I actually thought that I need to put in or use this time to do something productive. So what I do now, even before I start my day, I've already used Duolingo app on my mobile phone to learn some Spanish. I do some meditation, again, on one of the apps like Calm or Headspace. I do some breathing and stretching, and that's when I start my day at 8 o'clock. Usually that time would be spent on the road driving to work. So, it's given me that flexibility, and the people that I talk to, they also say the same thing. It was harder at the start, but as the time goes on, everyone's getting used to it. People are getting time to reinvent themselves. So learning new things, picking up new hobbies, time for more exercise. And I think that flexibility that this COVID's actually offering people, it's amazing. And at the end of the day as well, what I do is I finish my work at 5 usually, go for a run, come back, and then, I can get into my work again. Like, I do take a break in between as well. And our organization is doing some exercising classes during the day. So technology is really helping people, I think, connect. And so my team is based in Queensland. And on a regular basis, so before COVID, I don't think there was that much communication happening as is happening now.
Why is that, do you think?
That's because people want to make sure that we're looking after each other. So the managers, especially, they want to bring the team together, because working from home, you can sort of lose track of things and you can sort of feel a bit lonely. So our day starts with a checking. So we all check in on WhatsApp.
Okay.
And there are lots of photos. So Brisbane people are usually, you know, teasing us. They're sending us photos of beautiful sunshine in Brisbane.
Yeah.
And here we have our grey skies in Melbourne. So sometimes that's how the day starts. And
we do that to Luke sometimes when
oh, that's
yeah.
Oh, that's great. And Fridays. So Fridays we connect on our WhatsApp group by sending some jokes, and there are some music tunes shared every Friday. So it's really bringing people together.
Yeah.
And the more technology we use, I feel, I seriously do feel sometimes it's better than we were out there, because you wouldn't have time to get in touch with others. But now you want to make sure everyone's, you know, you're looking after people's mental health as well, making sure everyone's okay. You're connecting a lot more using technology.
Yeah.
Just add to that, Amy. To your point, Charu, yeah, I think it's been interesting to see how during this time, I feel like we've been forced to adopt technology in more ways to keep up communication with people. And so as a result of that increased adoption, what's happened is that we are using communication more, because there's there's a sort of a weird level of excitement with it, that we're using all these new tools. But then it's usually, like, if we're doing it the right way, it's actually quite effective for us, I think, with our relationship management.
Well, you guys wouldn't remember this, but pre-mobile phones, you didn't have all these apps to entertain yourself and to connect with people. So COVID's actually happening at
that time doesn't exist.
Actually happening at a pretty good time for us as humans. If it was 20 years ago, we'd be trying to dial each other, you know, on the dial phone, like, where are you? It's engaged. The network probably wouldn't have been able to handle the capacity, and we wouldn't have any Netflix. So you'd be watching the good old VHS or even something like just black and white TV.
Absolutely.
So I'd be grateful millennials where we're at.
That's right. And Luke, from your point of view, like, it seems like Charu and Edwin, you know, you were pretty well set up for this transition. You were already working remotely, had a lot of technology tools in place. For the organisations that you're seeing, Luke, that weren't so ready, what are the biggest challenges that they've had to face?
Yeah, look, I think that just, you know, Edwin raised that, and Charu raised, they've got remote teams already in place. So they probably had some, you know, communication ready.
Yeah.
But people who were sort of office bound and then found themselves having to work from home and in large quantity, in large numbers, there was a huge transition. You know, people were moving their equipment back home, so organisations had to think about that. Then there was a technology setup, so network connectivity, security, cyber security. I often wonder about these offshore suppliers and what they're doing, because you can see in some of these countries where they congregated their workforces in locations, in campuses, if you like, as soon as they moved back home, you know, the cybersecurity threat there, where there isn't the sort of network security that we have in a country like Australia, or in the US or in Canada. Some of these other countries, you know, just don't have that capability as yet. The networks are not as resilient. And so I think a lot of businesses have been starting to think about, well, how do I, or at the time, we're thinking about how do I get connectivity up and running, and how do I make it secure? How do I make my data secure and my people be able to work efficiently? Yeah, so interesting. Edwin and Charu, when you were getting set up, did you have anything like that where, you know, or was it already in place? You just connected into the internet and that was it? You already had your equipment at home?
I used to travel a lot for work, so mine was already set up, didn't have any issues. But I did hear from people who didn't work from external locations as much before, that did have some teething issues with their, you know, setting up internet connections and sometimes loss of connectivity and all of that. And also thinking, because a lot of people started work at the same time, think that it did impact the network as well. So there was slowness, there were dropouts, and all of those issues did happen initially.
And for you, Edwin, I guess working with clients across the globe, and to Charu's point, you know, network issues and just the overwhelming nature of the technology, like, what impact has this had on your clients, and what are you seeing from that perspective?
So particularly from my clients, and a lot of the issues was in terms of network being able to communicate, especially in video conferences. So we'd find that during the mornings, when most teams were doing their stand-ups at the same time, their virtual stand-ups and doing the daily check-ins, you wouldn't be able to support video at all, and some applications just wouldn't work at all. So we'd have to always set up alternatives, be it through Blue Jeans or Zoom or Google Meet. We'd always have a different application ready to jump onto in case we were not able to use our application. And we touch on some of the transitions that I've seen some of the clients have is that while I myself have been quite remote and already set up with a laptop with the correct VPNs and everything already installed, a lot of, particularly in call centers, they all had desktop machines. So one of the issues was sourcing the amount of laptops required to ship all of that equipment and set them up at home.
Yeah, I saw a photo on LinkedIn actually from a company that had all their laptops lined up on a desk ready for remote working. So they'd obviously made that transition as well, where they'd gone from having those desktop setups to then having to go out and purchase all these new laptops to just set up their employees working from home. So, you know, Sally, from your point of view as well, like what have you been seeing in terms of that communication? Like where does it start to really break down, and what do you think the technology solutions that are out there, which ones are working and which ones do you feel are just sort of completely overwhelming people right now from a communications point of view?
It's an interesting question. And, you know, I think the answer to that question varies, right? Because if you consider, say, a basic web conferencing, whether it's on the likes of Zoom or it's a WebEx or even Microsoft Teams, you know, there's certain, say, businesses where they've already adopted those technologies. And as a result, the employee cohorts, if you like, already know how to use them. So whether you're using them from a traditional office setting or remotely from a mobile device or a laptop, if you already know how to use them, you've already been onboarded with those technologies, this whole transition has been a lot easier. But I think where we've seen a breakdown in particular is for those organizations that didn't really appreciate that tech readiness in terms of becoming a modern organization with how they communicate with one another. So what's happened is that during COVID, they've been forced to go remote and work virtually. And what's happened is then they haven't had sufficient time to actually onboard their teams and provide them with adequate training to say, here is how you use, for example, Zoom or Microsoft Teams, because to the modern user who's been using it for however long or has maybe grown up in their professional life with these technologies, say someone like myself, to me, it's quite intuitive. It makes sense. But say for, you know, older generations, respectfully, like they didn't necessarily grow up with this technology. So if they haven't been taught how to use it correctly, don't be offended, Luke.
Luke's giving you the look.
Well, I've had to help you with Zoom before. So if people weren't already trained how to use these technologies and then they're in their own home environment without, say, you know, let's just call it their IT team nearby, they can't tap on the shoulder and say, hey, can you just show me how to get Microsoft Teams working? That's been quite a challenge for people. And so to answer your question, I think it's with the onboarding process that we've really seen that break down in different ways and to different extents for different organizations.
Just to follow on that, if I may, Amy, like one of the things that I've felt with the whole transition to this new way of working is everyone's using different technologies. So some people use Zoom and some people are using WebEx and some people are using Microsoft Teams and some people are using Blue Jeans. I've never heard of that one, Edwin, but I'll throw it in. I'll put a pair of Blue Jeans on. But basically what I think's funny about that is all of these technologies seem to interface with my computer in a different way. So as I move from one meeting, which is Zoom, to the next meeting, which is WebEx, all of a sudden my camera's facing the other way and there's no sound. And then I move to the next one and it reverses back. So I don't think that's got anything to do with age. I think that's just got to do with the way these things work.
It's all about the mindset, isn't it, Luke? It's not about the age, it's about mindset.
That's right.
Great.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. So Charu, from a team dynamic perspective and a people's perspective, to really support people through this journey, like how do you feel that organizations can actually support people through this so that the technology doesn't overcomplicate things? And to Luke's point, you know, you've got 10 different windows open and all different platforms. Like what can organizations do to really help their teams with this transition?
I believe, so I work for Airservices, and the way Airservices has actually made sure that people are trained and we're using only certain platforms, not too many, has made it much easier for people to grasp onto new platforms that we use. And ongoing training and communication. So if you're going to make any changes, sort of, you know, e-learning trainings are very important for people. So when they start using some things, and ongoing communication really helps people understand why we're using certain technology, and you know, also understand the pros and cons of not moving on from one to the other and to the other, because that is, as you guys are all mentioning, it can get a bit confusing and may not be very productive in the long run, because you're spending time trying to adjust your camera, spending time trying to understand the technology.
Yes.
So I think training people and making them understand why we're using something is as simple as that.
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to hear from our audience as well around the technology that's really supported them through this time, and even maybe the technology that's really hindered them, or where they've felt stuck and overwhelmed. And one of the points you mentioned, Luke, earlier was around that security and that sort of risk element to it as well. So, you know, from your perspective, and maybe even Edwin, you want to jump in on this one as well, like, what are some of the things that organizations aren't thinking of through this time that might come back to bite them later in terms of, you know, those technology setups and all those sorts of systems, and how to sort of streamline it later, because they may have just been thrown into it and have figured out some band-aid solutions that have some further implications. So what's your take on that? Maybe start with you, Luke.
Yeah, look, I think I'm interested to hear what Edwin and Charu have got to say about, you know, their transition to this new way of working. But
yeah,
I think when you're giving access to sort of your enterprise's ecosystem, you're not just talking about email and the internet, you're talking about corporate systems, and you're talking about access to, you know, things like process repositories and intranets and things that are sort of meaningful from a system and process perspective. And I think organizations, you know, really thought about, well, how do I grant that access and that identity? So I know of some organizations that really had to fast track their identity management solutions just so to be able to give people access within the environment.
And what does that mean, Luke, the identity management system? Can you break that down a little bit?
Yeah, we're just identifying that this is, you know, Luke Stow, this is his credentials, this is what he has access to within the environment.
Yeah.
So when you first log in, it grants you those access controls throughout your organization. And usually an administrator sets that type of regime. So you might get access to more folders and more drives and more systems than, you know, someone else. So it's a really important thing about controlling cybersecurity from an organization point of view, because it means you're identified and then you get the right access. But then remotely, you know, that becomes a broader issue, because now you've got all types of other issues with that broadening of your own environment. Before I could keep it here, and now I've got to open it up to a broader audience. And
can I just add there, sorry, before you jump in, Edwin, but, you know, I think what's interesting in the context of your question, Amy, and what you've just shared, Luke, is that I think one of the biggest things organisations need to consider is that, to Luke's point around maybe some of the security concerns with this change, and to what you said, Amy, in terms of people being forced into the position where they have to sort of adopt these new ways of working, organisations, I would urge them to really consider that this isn't going to go away. So although we may revert to some sort of, you know, on-premises working and whatnot, these technologies are still going to largely remain a part of the way we work. And so as a result, we shouldn't adopt a mindset where we say, okay, well, we may have some elevated security concerns right now, but when we go back to normal, we won't have those anymore. So I think it's important that they appreciate that this is the new, these are new concerns that are going to stay despite what may go back to some sort of normal.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. I agree with both of you. In fact, I'm studying cybersecurity at the moment so I'm doing masters in it, and it's very interesting to see how if we don't think about it now, or the organizations don't think about it now, how in the long run, as you mentioned, Luke, it can have a massive impact. And so for organizations, rather than going for something cheaper or something that's just freely available, making sure how resilient is the system, is it safe by design? So those questions need to be answered and thought through before, you know, them jumping into and getting any system because they just want a medium to communicate with the teams.
And to Sally's point, like, what are some of those trends that you think organizations should be adopting moving forward? You know, once we've sort of moved through this and it's, I guess, kind of the new normal, whatever that looks like. From your perspective, Edwin, you know, what are some of the things that you've seen are really working really well for your clients that you think they need to keep on doing post this COVID period?
Yep. So if I could just touch on the security, I actually agree with those points. We've spoken quite a bit about it, but I just wanted to earmark that a lot of organizations have tried to keep the lights on, and as a result of that, have allowed just any type of device, so people's personal devices, be it mobile or laptop, to actually access their corporate networks and systems just so they can get aboard. So one thing that these organizations should be thinking about is, if that is the case, that they do want to allow personal devices to access, is to start thinking about, from a security perspective, do they need specific security apps installed on these devices to ensure that there isn't any malicious softwares or Trojans trying to get into these systems.
Yeah.
And I add in there to your point, Edwin, I think, you raised something that's really critical for organizations to think about. I was reading something just again last night, and it's fascinating that so many organizations and leadership in organizations will think about cybersecurity as something that only affects the sort of big giants, if you like, in terms of entities. But to your point, even email phishing, something as basic as that, is usually still one of the most common ways that cyber attacks are actually carried out. So to your point, I think it's absolutely critical they think about those implications.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to shift gears a little bit here, guys, because one of the things that, I used to hear all of the time from organizations before COVID was that, they didn't want their teams to be working remotely because they didn't think they were going to be productive. And they didn't trust them to work from home because of all the distractions and life and everything that happens. What's been the impact on your productivity since you've been working from home? Have you noticed that, it's gone up or down? And that might be normal for you guys because you're used to remote working, or it may be just your team and other people around you that have made that transition. So, Charu, I'll start with you. Like, what's that been like from a productivity point of view?
Well, I'd have to say, personally for myself, I can see my productivity increase. And only because working from home has given me that opportunity to make sure I'm not stressed anymore. I don't have to get up at 5 o'clock, get ready, be on the road at a certain time, go from meetings to meetings, or fly, get to the airport at 4 in the morning. So because of that, I feel there is less stress. There is more time to think and do my planning. So as I mentioned before, I do have the time now early in the morning to sit and do my planning for the day. And the thinking time that people didn't have, because it was all do, it's now thinking, less stress, which equals more productivity for me.
Yeah, fantastic. And what's been the result of that, I guess, for your wider team as well? Have other people sort of followed that same routine, or have they come unstuck a little bit when it comes to productivity?
I think everyone's productivity has increased, and time and again, it's shown, board meetings and whatnot. The executives have come back to tell us how the productivity has increased. The amount of work we're actually producing since we started working from home is actually quite more than what it was when we were still in the office. And that's maybe because, we're spending less time traveling. And I'm talking not just local travel, but, traveling to other states, because, we've got a geographically dispersed team. So I think all of those things have actually seen productivity increase, and my team certainly a lot more. And the bosses are quite happy, and they keep asking us, how flexible do you want to be in future once this finishes? So it's actually a great thing to hear, and everyone's sort of happy to be working from home or to continue working from home even once this COVID thing finishes.
And just to go on from that, if I may, Amy, like Edwin, and maybe start with you, but Edwin and short, how would people know? Is there some type of tool you're using for work allocation and status reporting, or how is your organisation tracking your productivity?
So from my perspective, it would just be based on deliverables, because on a day-to-day basis, as a team, we are doing a virtual stand-up every day. And video conferencing has been really brilliant with that. And even before COVID, in those instances where we were working across multiple locations, we would have a stand-up either weekly or daily to ensure that from a project perspective, that everything is running to track. And I guess to touch a bit more on what this has shown organizations is essentially, I believe most organizations, I would say around the world, is now working remotely. So if anything, obviously there was a bit of a ramp up in terms of trying to transition across to working remotely, but it's proven the hypothesis to most organizations that you can trust your employees to work at home and remotely and be able to do their job.
Yeah. So to Edwin's point, Sally, do you think, there's going to be that new hybrid approach to work? Do you think it'll be 100% remote? Like, what are you seeing with organizations with how you think they're going to structure their workforce moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And to what Edwin was saying, I think organizations have learned a lot during this time. And I think that learning process has caused a lot of them a lot of pain. But I think there's also a lot of opportunity in that, particularly for the ones that have managed to at least get some parts of that puzzle, if you like, right, in terms of how it's working for them from an operational standpoint and from an experience standpoint for both like internal stakeholders and external. I would say further to that, the ones that are figuring out how to make it work for their specific organization, they'll certainly sort of adopt that moving forward, even when we do start to revert to some sort of normal, for example, going back into the office, certain number of times per week. But I would say for the leaders in the organizations that are still thinking that for some reason this is all just going to go away and we will go back to what it was once upon a time, because I still hear people talk to that effect. I would urge those ones not to think in that manner. I think you need to use this as the learning experience it is and just take it for what it is. And for those who have been putting off, for example, technology transformations in their business, no matter how low or high that scale may be from a tech standpoint, that they really consider how they can actually improve processes and the experience for especially their employees and their customers during this time. Take it as inspiration.
Absolutely. And I imagine there'd be a lot of cost savings there as well. We hear about not using office space and what that office space is going to be converted into and everything as we move forward into the future. Luke, what are you seeing in terms of from a leadership point of view around, as we move into this new normal, what are some of the challenges that are thrown up for leaders in the technology space?
Yeah, I think it's a really important part of the conversation in terms of what role has leadership played in making this way of working easier. I really identified with what Edwin was saying. So, around the question of how are your organisations tracking your productivity, he tied it to deliverables, and he mentioned the word, they're using some agile rituals to, like a stand-up and probably a tracking board, some type of Kanban board to ensure that they've got visibility into who's doing what and what are the due dates and what are the dependencies, and opening up that conversation. I think one of the challenges for leadership is really getting their head around that, because I think, there's been a lot of organisations that haven't yet moved down the agile path and have been sort of quite content to stick into, well, I do waterfall and I do these type of methodologies for different type of development needs. So to hear, Edwin's not the first person that's mentioned that to me, that there is this sort of ritual that's, come into a remote working environment, which is picking up on some of those lean and agile terms and using those on an ongoing basis. And Charu, is that the same for you?
It is the same, exactly as Edwin mentioned. So for productivity is the daily catch up that we do, and then the deliverables that we have in place. So there are a lot more deliverables getting ready in a short span of time since we started working from home. So
can I just
agree?
To add my sort of couple of cents onto that, I think, you all make a really good point. If you consider just basic project management approaches to measuring performance and productivity and whatnot, I know that I've certainly, adopted productivity tools. I'm a great fan of Asana. And like know that.
Used to Asana tasks, aren't we, Luke?
Yeah, so taking learnings like that I've always appreciated. I've always been very much a project management native, but I think more companies are adopting those sorts of basic applications during this time as they do try and streamline communication. So back to the communication standpoint between teams and even to an extent sometimes with clients to sort of, eliminate unnecessary back and forth email, which feels quite old school in today's day and age.
It's a great point though. Sorry, Amy, what tools are you using, guys?
So we use WebEx, more so, Collaborate, mostly that, and Skype for business.
What do you use for your yoga, Charu?
Zoom. Yeah. But that's not available on the company laptop, actually.
There you go.
So you have to use your personal one.
The online yoga, that's for sure. What about you, Edwin? What have been your go-to tools in this time?
So in terms of collaboration tools, so there was some of my clients did have an issue with standardization, whereas when we first moved to remote working, there was a whole bunch of different tools being used. So we had WhatsApp, there was Slack running, they had Teams running at the same time. I think an organization was also deciding to use Yammer at that point, if anyone still uses that. But essentially, one of the issues was there was too many ways to collaborate and nobody knew what channel to use. So there was a bit of a standardization sort of exercise that was going on. And what was kind of decided was that we would use Microsoft Teams in terms of collaborations, meetings and such. And from a documentation perspective and meeting minutes, that would be within Confluence. And or where possible, or project management, as well as tickets and Kanban boards would sit within Jira.
Yeah, sounds a lot.
Yep.
Sounds like there's a lot to keep track of. Yeah.
Sorry, just say there to what you just mentioned, Edwin. I think you make a really you start a really interesting conversation talking about standardization, and if you think about that in the context of remote working and new ways of working among COVID. Like, I think that's actually a very interesting prospect for a conversation, because to your question, Amy, to Luke, I think it was earlier around leadership and adopting technology during this time. I think standardization is something quite important to consider. And then even if you just consider the broader business community working together, it's going to be an interesting space in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to Charu's point before as well with that standardization, like I heard a lady at a cafe the other day and she was just overwhelmed with all the different tools that she had to adopt. And granted, she's not a millennial. Sorry, Luke.
Sounds like Luke.
But it's been, I think, a common theme that's popped up for a lot of organizations and everything out there, which has been great because it has been such a challenging time for everyone. So, you know, from your perspectives, you know, if we think about sort of now and then moving through COVID into the future, like what are some really key takeaways that you think the audience can sort of take away with them that you've sort of learned through this time?
If I can kick that off, I would certainly say one thing is, and Charu, you might appreciate this, but really having like a change agent mindset. I think that's everyone's realized, particularly at a leadership level, but also at just sort of any level of employment. Everyone's realized that, particularly with the new ways of working, we all really play a significant role in terms of, you know, how we work with each other, and therefore, you know, the deliverables we can achieve and the outcomes we can achieve and the experiences we can achieve. So I would say for me, particularly during this time, having that change mindset and really taking accountability for what role you play in that, no matter who you are, is really a big thing. And so in a strange way, I think it's been quite empowering for a lot of people during this time.
Agree.
I might as well go next because I'm sort of on the same screen, but I think there's a few things there that, you know, I think the fundamentals are really important for a remote workforce, like internet connection, strong internet connection.
Yeah.
You know, I'm still talking to people that are out in rural country areas in other countries, not just in the country I'm in. And it's very difficult for them to get strong connectivity. So we need to fix that. That's got to be fixed. I think too, you know, standardization. Look, my view is technology companies have got a job to do. I don't want to as a user. My mobile phone connects. It connects to all the apps. There's one operating system. It all works. Microsoft, Mac, get your act together. Come on, bring this stuff together. I'm sick of having my camera turn around the wrong way. What we need to do is to drive some standardization against these big companies and just make it work for us, please.
And someone maybe needs to release an e-learning course. Someone mentioned e-learning earlier, just to teach Luke how to use all of the video conferencing software.
I don't need it.
Would be helpful.
I don't need it. I've got 2 helpers.
You just have to be resourceful. You don't need to know everything.
Right.
Yeah.
That's it. Sorry, Edwin, you go.
I didn't want to repeat what Luke said, but he basically beat me to it. And being a process expert in this call, is that one of the most important things would be process and standardization, right? So if as an organization, the way that you set up your remote should be the same for everyone. You shouldn't have 3 or 4 different laptops that you need to support. You should be using the same tools and techniques. So similar to the way that omnichannel is now affecting the customer, where your experience should be the same online and offline. And within each organization, you should try to strive to have the same experience for your employees, so that wherever they're working from home or from the office or in a cafe, that you try to give them the same experience, that it works the same way each time.
Yeah. Just on that, Edwin, like what is the biggest impact if organizations get that wrong, you know?
I think one of the big examples is within COVID is that some organizations having many different systems to support is that people just weren't able to do their work. They were, so IT support would have been backed up. They wouldn't have been able to, you would see productivity drop. And then as a result of that, engagement from employees would drop as well, just purely from not being able to do their work. I've had a friend who, just due to being locked out of their PC, she wasn't able to do work for a couple of days. And that's one time that the organization has to pay for.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah. Charu, what are some key takeaways that you've sort of learned from this period of time?
Well, keep things simple. I think organizations don't need to go and try and get as many, communication systems as possibly they can, but the idea is to keep using the limited ones where they're sure that the system is, safe by design, is resilient, is easy to use, and can be supported by the internal teams as well. Because, the more systems we have, who's going to support, who's going to do the maintenance? So those sort of questions arise because if there are issues, everyone's going to ring their IT department. They're not going to be calling, Zoom or anyone else. It's just going to be their IT department. Can they support it? Yeah. If the answer is yes, if they're happy with how safe the platform they're using is, I think that's the way to go forward.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you guys on the Reboot Show today. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I think it's such a practical way for people to sort of come to terms with what's going on now and then get ready for the future as well. So thanks so much. Make sure if you're listening to this to subscribe to the show so you don't miss the next episode. Bye. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye, Charu.
Bye.